Janice Paige passed away in the summer of 2024, alone in the house she had lived in for nearly 40 years. A retired theater actress, she had once been a household name, known for her commanding stage presence and hauntingly beautiful voice. But time had taken its toll. By the end, she rarely left the house, speaking only to the walls, as if holding long conversations with unseen companions. When her body was discovered sitting upright in her favorite velvet armchair, as if waiting for a final curtain call, the house was left untouched for months. Family was distant, and no one rushed to claim it. Some of the neighbors said they still saw movement behind the curtains at night, long after Janice had been taken away. Others whispered that her voice, low and melancholic, could still be heard drifting through the corridors. By early 2025, the house was put on the market. It didn't take long for the Whitmore family to buy it. Mark and Ellen Whitmore, along with their 2 children, Nathan, 12, and Sophie, 9, saw the home as an opportunity, a chance to restore something old and beautiful. The lingering unease surrounding the property meant they got it at a good price. They moved in during the spring, eager to make the house their own. But Janice had never really left. First, it was small things. Doors that wouldn't stay closed. A lingering scent of perfume in the hallway, despite no one in the family using it. Then came the music. At night, Ellen would hear soft humming drifting through the upstairs hallway. Sometimes it was just a few notes, sometimes an entire melody, always familiar but just out of reach. One evening, as she was tucking Sophie into bed, her daughter suddenly asked, "Do you hear the lady singing?" Ellen felt a cold chill run down her spine. "What lady, sweetie?" "The one in the red dress." There was no woman in a red dress. Not anymore. Nathan, ever the skeptic, decided to set up his phone in the old theater room, Janice's private stage, where she had once rehearsed for hours on end. When he reviewed the footage the next morning, he expected to see nothing. Instead, at 3:14 a.m., the heavy red curtains shifted as if someone unseen was parting them. Then, just for a moment, a shadow flickered across the stage. Could have been a trick of the light. Could have been. The final straw came in late October. The family had gone out for dinner, returning to find the entire house in disarray, furniture overturned, picture frames shattered, and Janice's old piano, untouched for months, playing a single haunting note. That night, they packed their bags and left. By December, the house was back on the market. It remains empty to this day. No one has stayed there longer than a few months. Some say it's the drafty old floors, the creaky pipes, the natural noises of an aging house. Others say Janice is still waiting for her final standing ovation. The house on Waverly Lane remained empty through the winter, its windows dark, its once welcoming front porch now a place where dead leaves gathered in brittle heaps. Snow fell heavily that year, covering the roof in thick, undisturbed drifts. By late December, frost had crept across the edges of the stained glass windows, the intricate floral patterns now obscured by the slow, inevitable hand of time. Inside, however, the air did not hold the biting chill of winter. It was still, heavy, a silence that was not merely the absence of noise, but the presence of something unseen, something that lingered in the dim-lit hallways and the forgotten corners. The dust settled differently in some rooms, untouched in places where no feet had passed since the Whitmores fled, as though something unseen walked the floors, pacing, waiting. The theater room, in particular, remained strangely untouched. The old red curtains, once rich and vibrant, now hung like tired sentinels, their once elegant folds weighed down by time. Yet, inexplicably, they did not gather dust as the rest of the house did. It was as if the air here still moved, stirred by something unseen. The wooden floorboards, polished and worn from decades of Janice's footsteps, still carried the faintest trace of a presence. If one were to stand in the doorway long enough, if they were to listen closely in the deep hours of the night when the world outside was quiet, they might hear it: the gentle rustle of fabric, the whisper of a gown sweeping across the stage, the almost imperceptible intake of breath before a note is sung. By early spring, the house was relisted. The real estate agency, eager to erase the growing reputation of the place, adjusted the listing carefully. Charming Victorian home, spacious, unique character, Price to sell. There was no mention of the Whitmores. No mention of why they had left in such haste. It was April when the new owners arrived. David and Lillian Graves were different from the Whitmores. They had no children, no warm dreams of filling the house with the laughter of a young family. They were quiet people, private, drawn to the home for reasons they did not entirely understand themselves. Lillian, in particular, felt something pull at her when she saw the listing, an inexplicable sense of familiarity, though she had never set foot in this town before. On the day they moved in, the sky was a dull, washed-out gray, thick with the promise of rain that never quite arrived. Lillian stepped through the front door first, inhaling deeply. The house smelled of age, of wood polished too many times, of fabric left untouched in dim rooms. Yet beneath it all, there was something else. A faint trace of perfume, floral and powdery, like the kind her grandmother used to wear. She said nothing to David as they walked through the house, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. It felt strange, moving into a home so quickly abandoned by its previous owners. There were small signs of their abrupt departure. A drawer left half open in the kitchen, a forgotten toy tucked into the corner of the upstairs hallway. That first night, the house was unnervingly quiet. No traffic passed on the street outside. No neighbors called to welcome them. It was the kind of silence that felt intentional. Lillian lay awake long after David had fallen into the slow, rhythmic breathing of sleep. The wind pressed against the old glass panes, making them groan in their frames. Somewhere downstairs, the floorboards creaked a single, deliberate sound, as if someone had shifted their weight just beyond the staircase. She told herself it was nothing. But then, from down the hall, came the sound of humming. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Lillian's breath caught in her throat. It was faint, almost distant, like a voice carried on the wind, but unmistakably real. A woman's voice, low, melodic, the hum of an old song that felt both familiar and completely foreign. It did not waver, did not stop or falter, as though whoever was singing did not care that she was being heard. Lillian turned her head toward the bedroom door, which stood slightly ajar, the darkness of the hallway stretching beyond it like an inkblot bleeding into the dim glow of the bedside lamp. The hum continued, a slow, deliberate tune. She forced herself to breathe, to listen, to rationalize. Perhaps it was the pipes, old and groaning as the house settled. Perhaps the wind found its way through some unseen crack in the walls. And yet, somewhere in the back of her mind, a memory stirred, not her own, but something deeper, something she could not explain. The melody was familiar, though she could not place it. She sat up slowly, the bed creaking beneath her, but David did not stir. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, its screen illuminating her face with cold blue light. 2:13 a.m. The hum did not stop. Lillian swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet meeting the chilled wooden floor. A hesitation, a moment of stillness where she considered waking David. But what would she say? She stood, the air against her skin thick with an unspoken weight. Step by step, she moved toward the door, pressing her palm lightly against it. The wood felt warm beneath her fingers. The humming was coming from down the hall. She pushed the door open, stepping out into the dim corridor. The house had been left largely untouched since they moved in, their belongings still in boxes stacked against the walls. The hallway stretched before her, ending in the darkness of the staircase leading down to the main floor. To her left, the guest bedroom, its door slightly ajar. And beyond that, the theater room. The humming grew clearer. Lillian moved forward, her breath shallow, her heartbeat a steady drum in her ears. The floor creaked beneath her, but the sound did not disturb the melody. The air smelled different here, old dust and something softer, something floral. She reached the theater room. The door was closed. She did not remember closing it before. Lillian pressed her palm to the wood, feeling the faint vibration of something beyond it, a presence just on the other side. She hesitated only a moment before turning the handle, pushing the door open slowly, the hinges groaning like a drawn-out whisper. The room was dark, only the faintest sliver of moonlight filtering through the high windows. The heavy red curtains hung still, yet the air carried the weight of movement, as though someone had just passed through, their presence lingering like the final note of a song. And then silence. The humming stopped. Lillian stepped inside, her bare feet meeting the cool wooden floor. The air felt heavier here, pressed against her skin like unseen hands. She swallowed. Then, from the darkness near the stage, the sound of a single, deliberate footstep. And another. Then, a breath. Not her own. A whisper. Lillian. Lillian froze. The whisper was soft, delicate, but unmistakably real. It came from the shadows near the stage, from the velvet darkness that seemed to stretch beyond the physical boundaries of the room. It did not echo, did not carry like a sound should it simply existed, hanging in the thick air between them. The wooden floor beneath her feet felt strangely warm, as if the house itself was aware of her presence, reacting to it. She fought the instinct to retreat, to run back to the safety of her bed, to pretend she had heard nothing at all. But she had, and something deep within her knew that ignoring it would change nothing. The scent in the room was stronger now, powdery, floral, familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. Lillian swallowed, her throat dry, her pulse drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She took a step forward. The floor groaned under her weight, but nothing stirred in the dark. The thick velvet curtains remained still, their deep folds swallowing the weak slivers of moonlight that barely touched the stage. Lillian, the whisper again, but this time it was closer. The breath behind it was real. Lillian's knees locked, her body instinctively bracing for something movement, a presence, the rush of cold air that always accompanied the unseen. But none of it came, only the feeling of something waiting, watching. She exhaled, forcing herself to steady. "Who's there?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, the words falling flat in the air, devoured by the stillness. No answer, only silence. And yet there was something there. Her eyes flicked across the darkness, searching for an outline, a shift, anything that could explain the crawling sensation at the back of her neck. Then, slowly, her gaze settled on the stage. The curtains had been closed when she entered. She was sure of it. But now, a narrow gap had opened in the heavy fabric, just enough for a sliver of empty space. Something had moved, or someone. A sharp, involuntary shudder ran through her, and she took a step back, her heel brushing against the edge of the doorway. Her body ached to flee, to turn and bolt down the hall, to wake David and beg him to leave this house behind forever. But she didn't move. Instead, she reached for the light switch on the wall, her fingers fumbling blindly against the cool brass plate. Her breath hitched as she found it, her pulse thundering in anticipation. She flipped the switch. The stage remained dark. The bulb above her flickered once, twice, then burst. Glass cracked, a sharp, hissing pop as the room plunged into deeper shadow. The only light now the dim silver glow of the moon, filtering weakly through the high, narrow windows. And in that moment, a shape, not fully visible, not quite solid, but there, standing just behind the parted curtain. A woman's silhouette, still as death, the outline of a long gown cascading to the floor, the faintest glint of what could have been a face, though it remained obscured by shadow. Lillian's breath hitched, her body paralyzed between fight and flight. The silence thickened. Then the whisper came again, lower, stronger. "You remember me." Lillian's stomach twisted. The voice, she did know it. Not from this house, not from any memory she could place, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere just beyond the reach of waking thought. Her hands trembled at her sides. The shape did not move. The curtains, however, began to shift slowly, as though a breeze had caught them, though there was no wind here. They parted inch by inch, revealing more of the darkness behind them, the space that should have been empty. But it wasn't, because something was stepping forward. And then, a low creak, the sound of a foot pressing into the old wooden stage. A single, deliberate step. Lillian's body finally obeyed. She turned. She ran. The corridor stretched before her like a tunnel, too long, too dark, the edges swallowed in shadow. Lillian ran, her bare feet striking the cold wood, breath tearing from her throat in uneven bursts. The air itself felt thick, pressing against her skin, resisting her movement. The house did not want her to leave. Behind her, the sound of footsteps, not hurried, not frantic like her own, slow, measured. A presence that did not need to rush because it knew there was nowhere for her to go. The whisper had been real. The voice had known her name. She reached the bedroom door and shoved it open so hard it slammed against the wall. The sharp crack startled David awake, his body jerking upright in the bed, eyes wide with confusion. "Lillian?" His voice was thick with sleep, but she was already at the bedside, gripping his arm, nails digging into his skin. "Get up," she gasped. "David, we have to go." Then, from the hallway, a sound. Not footsteps, not humming. Laughter. Soft. Amused. The sound of someone who had been watching for a very long time and found all of this very amusing. Lillian felt her stomach turn to ice. David frowned, still dazed. "What?" Then he heard it too. His face changed. The confusion drained from his eyes, replaced with something else. Fear. Lillian's grip tightened on his arm. "Get up," she whispered again, but now her voice was shaking. David moved quickly now, throwing the covers aside, feet hitting the floor. The laughter had stopped, but the silence was worse. It was expectant. The hallway beyond their open door was dark. The light should have spilled from their bedside lamp, reaching out to cut through the blackness. But it didn't. The darkness just absorbed it, like the house itself was swallowing the glow. David took a slow step forward. Lillian yanked him back. "No," she whispered. "Don't." But it was too late. From just beyond the doorway, a voice, so close it could have been inside the room with them. "You can't leave." The floor beneath them shifted. Not a tremor, not an illusion. Shifted. A slow, steady movement, as though the house had drawn a breath and was exhaling beneath their feet. Lillian's knees buckled. David stumbled backward. Then, the door slammed shut. The lamp beside the bed flickered once then died. The room was plunged into darkness. And in that darkness, something moved. David's hand found Lillian's in the dark, his grip tight, grounding, but she could feel the tremor in his fingers. The air had changed thicker, pressing against her skin, the weight of something unseen filling the space around them. A sound. Not footsteps this time. Not laughter. Breathing. Slow, measured inhalations like someone standing just inches away, watching, waiting. Lillian's pulse thundered in her ears. "David," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "The door." He understood. He moved, fumbling in the darkness, fingers scrambling for the handle. Lillian heard it rattle. Once, twice, then nothing. "It stuck," David hissed, his voice strained. A whisper so close to her ear that she felt the breath against her skin. "You don't remember me." Lillian flinched, her body recoiling on instinct, though there was no one there, no one she could see. But she knew now with a certainty that made her stomach clench it was here. It had always been here, and she did remember. Not fully, not clearly, but the song, the whisper, the perfume in the air. It had been buried deep in the forgotten places of her mind, waiting to be pulled back into the light. She turned blindly, reaching through the darkness. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. The silence stretched, then movement. The curtains at the far end of the room, where the tall windows loomed against the night, began to pull apart. Slowly, steadily, revealing the pale, moonlit glass beyond. And reflected in that glass, a woman, standing in the center of the room. Her gown was deep red, rich fabric flowing around her feet like liquid shadow. Her face was pale, her lips curved in the faintest trace of a smile, but her eyes. Lillian's breath caught in her throat. Janice Paige, not as she had looked in the photographs, not as the frail, aging woman who had died alone in this house, but as she had once been. Tall, beautiful, alive, except she wasn't. Lillian wanted to move, wanted to look away, but the reflection held her there, trapped, like a thread had been hooked deep inside her and pulled. "You left me," the woman whispered. Lillian shook her head, her voice trembling. I don't understand. You should. The floor beneath them creaked. The walls groaned. The air in the room thickened further, pressing into her ears, her lungs, as if the very house was tightening around them. David was still at the door, struggling, yanking, but it would not budge. Lillian took a step forward, her body moving before her mind could stop it. The reflection did not move with her. Janice remained still, watching, waiting. You know why you're here, the woman murmured. And then it came. A rush of memories, slamming into Lillian's mind with the force of a wave, drowning her in images she had never seen but felt as if she had lived them. The Grand Theater, its lights casting golden halos on deep red curtains. The woman in the dressing room, humming to herself as she traced a fingertip along a handwritten letter. Promise. A betrayal. Lillian staggered back, gasping, the weight of it overwhelming. You left, Janice whispered. Her smile did not fade. Her voice did not rise. But the house shook. The lamp beside the bed fell, shattering on the floor. David was shouting now, pulling at the door, but the words were distant, muffled. Everything else was drowned out by the sound rising around them, whispers, voices, an unseen audience murmuring just beyond the veil. Lillian pressed her hands to her head. I don't remember. I don't know what you want from me. Janice's smile widened. You will. And then, everything stopped. The house went silent. The air thinned. The door to the bedroom swung open. David stumbled backward, nearly falling, before grabbing Lillian's arm and pulling her toward the hallway. Come on now. She let herself be dragged, her feet moving before her mind could process. They ran down the stairs, their footsteps echoing through the empty house. The front door stood open. Shouldn't have been, but they didn't question it. They ran. Into the night. Into the safety of the darkened street, where the house could not hold them anymore. And as they stumbled away, breathless, shaken, Lillian dared to glance back. The house was still, but in the upstairs window behind the sheer white curtains, a figure stood, watching, waiting. And though the distance was too great to see her clearly, Lillian knew. Janice Paige had never left, and she never would. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.